When I first arrived in the United States, I was 20 years old, young, idealistic, and a little bit naive. I had never been away from home before. Not really. Sure, I had visited relatives in other towns in France, but hopping on a plane alone to live with strangers in another country was something entirely different. I told myself it was an adventure, something brave, something that would help me grow. I came as an au pair, a live-in nanny meant to experience American culture while helping care for children. I was placed with the Joseph family. They lived in a pristine, picturesque suburb in upstate New York, the kind of neighborhood with trimmed hedges, minivans in the driveway, and smiling joggers waving good morning. You know the type. Too perfect. The Josephs had two boys, Brock, 12, and Brandon, 9. Brock was loud and a bit of a handful, but nothing out of the ordinary. Typical big brother stuff. Teasing, too much screen time, messy room. Brandon, though. Brandon was something else entirely. From the moment I met him, I felt something off. Not shyness, not awkwardness, wrongness. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me with these glassy, pale blue eyes. Eyes that didn't blink. Eyes that felt too still. Then he asked, without blinking, "Are you the new maid?" I chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm your new au pair," I said, kneeling to his level. "I'm here to help take care of you." Brandon just kept staring. His lips curled slightly, almost like a smirk, but it was hollow, joyless. The last one didn't last long. I assumed he meant it as a joke. Now I'm not so sure. At first, I chalked his behavior up to some kind of social issue. Maybe he was just shy, or maybe he had trouble trusting new people. But day after day, he tested me. Small things at first. He'd tell me things that weren't true, like that his brother hit him when I knew for a fact he hadn't. He'd hide my phone or take food from the fridge and then say I ate it. He told his school teacher I screamed at him and locked him in the closet. Luckily, the teacher didn't believe him, but his lies were getting bolder. Once, I asked him if he wanted to go to the park. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're going to die in this house," then walked away like he had just said he didn't want a sandwich. Things only got worse. One morning, I woke up to find a dead bird on my pillow. Not just dead, mutilated. Wings broken, head twisted unnaturally. My first thought was maybe a cat had gotten in, until I remembered Brandon staring at me the day before as I'd fed the birds in the backyard. That afternoon, I confronted him. He didn't deny it. He just said, "Birds are dumb," and walked away, dragging a stick along the hallway wall, scratching it like nails on a chalkboard. Then came the thumbtacks. One night, I was getting ready for bed. I had just brushed my teeth and was about to pull down the covers when something caught the light. Tiny reflections, shimmering under the ceiling lamp. My mattress was covered in thumbtacks. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all sticking straight up through the sheets. I stared in disbelief, my heart pounding. If I had been more tired, less aware, I might have laid down without noticing. The thought made my stomach twist. I gathered every tack in a shoebox and confronted Mr. and Mrs. Joseph the next morning. They were polite, but dismissive. "Oh, kids do silly things," Mrs. Joseph said with a forced smile. "Brandon's just testing boundaries." Testing boundaries, I thought. What kind of child does this to someone they just met? Brandon began to follow me, silently. I'd turn around in the hallway and he'd be there, unmoving. I'd be in the kitchen and I'd feel his eyes boring into me from the doorway. I once caught him watching me while I slept. When I opened my eyes, he didn't flinch. He just stood there in the dark and whispered, "I know what your heart sounds like." A few weeks later, I smelled something terrible in the backyard, something wrong. I followed the scent to a disturbed patch of soil beneath the hedges. When I dug a little with the garden trowel, I found the rotting corpses of 3 rabbits. Their bodies were mangled, and one had string tied tightly around its tiny legs. I nearly vomited. I ran to tell the Josephs. They were concerned, but not enough. When they asked Brandon about it, he simply said, "I didn't do it." And that was the end of it. Mrs. Joseph said, "It's probably the neighbor's dog," and changed the subject. That night I locked my door and shoved a chair under the knob. The worst came about a week later. I woke up in the middle of the night. My room was dark, quiet, but something felt off. I sat up and screamed. Brandon was standing at the foot of my bed. He was holding a knife. I screamed louder than I ever have in my life. My chest hurt, my ears rang. The sound of my own fear didn't even seem real. The light flipped on and Mr. Joseph came running. Brandon dropped the knife instantly and said, "I was sleepwalking." The knife had come from the kitchen, one of the big ones. They believed him. The next morning, Mrs. Joseph said she found her pearl necklace in my bag, one I had never touched. I tried to explain, but she was already on the phone with the agency. I packed my bags while Brandon watched me from the top of the stairs, his expression blank. As I closed the door behind me, he whispered, "Told you, you wouldn't last." I left the U.S. feeling shattered. That experience stayed with me. For a while, I thought I would never feel safe again, never trust another child. I had nightmares for months about those cold eyes, that emotionless smile. Years later, I moved back to the States. I've built a life here now, and most days I'm fine. But sometimes I think about Brandon, about the way he looked at me like I wasn't even human, like I was just a piece on a game board he was playing. I wonder where he is now. I wonder what kind of man he's become. And I pray, genuinely pray, that he never gets another chance to play with someone else. Because some kids aren't just troubled. Some kids are born without a soul.